Designing for laser cutting is a slightly different experience than designing for 3D print. The main difference is that we're working with panels that have a set thickness, that are flat and can't be changed in shape. We're also using a subtractive method, which means that we're taking material away, we're not adding, and that basically means that we need to work with the material size that we have and reduce the amount of material we're going to start with. As we go through, we're going to be investigating and making judgments on how the characteristics and properties of materials, systems, components, tools and equipment can be combined to create design solutions. Our success criteria will be to manage components in Fusion 360, to explain the impact of the materials on the design process, and to join two or more laser cut components. What we're going to be creating is a finger type jointed and screwed joint where the screw is laser cut into the joint piece of plastic and enables a tight and neat fit. Design must take into account the materials being used. The primary examples are material dimensions, the strength of material under tension and compression, and the design must take into account the types of screws being used, specifically their dimensions, which is somewhat dictated by the material being used. The material that we're going to be using by example in this is going to be black acrylic sheeting. So the black acrylic sheeting, we have some key questions before we can begin our design. The key questions is how much or how large are the sheets that we have? What's the largest cut size we can make? And size versus strength. Can we cope with, or can our material cope with being cut to the sizes that we're talking about? Will it be strong enough? For example, if we cut something that is 80 centimeters long but only 2 millimeters wide, will it be able to cope with that dimension? The key property of our material that we're using is the thickness of the material that we're going to be cutting. Our laser will only be able to cut to a certain thickness, but we also need to keep in mind the thickness when we're creating our design. All panels made from the material that we're using can only be extruded in Fusion 360 to this thickness. The thickness of the black acrylic looks like it measures at 3.2 millimeters. It is roughly 3 millimeters in thickness, so we'll extrude all of the panels made out of black acrylic to 3 millimeters. If we're going to use other sizes, we'll have to use those panels that are going to be that other size to be that thickness. For example, if we were joining 3 millimeter black acrylic with 12 millimeter pine, we would have to actually make those adjustments in our model on Fusion 360. Our hardware that we're going to use, the screws and nuts that we will use, also predict or change the way that we do our design. The key part of these screws is the measurements that we have to do. We need to ensure that we measure carefully enough to be able to create a 3D model in Fusion 360. You can also research these measurements by looking up the size of the screw online. For example, if I did a search on M3 screws and nuts, I should be able to get diagrams which show measurements on them. However, sometimes you don't know what size the screw you are using, so you need to do lots of measurements. Once your measurements are complete, you should be able to draw them in Fusion 360 like I have now, or you can sketch them on a piece of paper. I would only really go to the effort of drawing them in Fusion 360 if I was presenting to a client who was paying money and they wanted to see what the end result would look like with the screws in place, or if I was putting it into a portfolio for marking, I would definitely put the screws in any render that I did. The procedural overview that we'll be going through is that we need to first create an overlapping panel model. Basically, all of the panels that we will use will overlap into each other so that we can create joints later. Once we've created all the panels in place, then we create the material joints. Once we've created the material joints, then we can create the screw provisioning if needed. For the first part, we're going to go into Fusion 360 and create our overlapping panel model. So here we are in Fusion 360, and here is the nut and bolt that I've modeled, which match perfectly to scale the measurements I've done on my particular nut and bolt that I'm using, which is an M3 15 millimeter long nut and bolt. I don't need to use those in my model, and as I said, you would only use those in your model if you are A, selling to a customer and they wanted to see what it was going to look like, or B, if you're trying to get really good marks in your portfolio and you want to show the final product before you actually do it, so that you can do a compare and contrast and you can do evaluations and all that sort of thing. Showing those extra features will probably earn you extra marks because you're showing a greater understanding and vision. But anyway, we're going to create a new file and we're going to create a new design. And for this design, I'm going to create a simple box with a couple of legs on it, so that we can cut out a box with no top, so that we can maybe put pencils or something in it, like a pencil holder on a desk, that sort of thing. So let's start with a new sketch. So I'm going to create a new sketch. And basically my new sketch, I'm going to start with the main side that I'm going to use, which is going to be on this one here. And I'm going to create a rectangle. The rectangle is going to be of a size, let's set the dimensions straight off, of size, let's just go 60 wide, so 60 millimeters wide, and we're going to go twice as high as wide, so 120 millimeters tall. Let's make sure that's in the middle. There are probably nicer ways of doing this, but I just tend to do it like by typing in these dimensions here and here, and that's going to be set in the middle now. If I press on that and go 60, so I'm happy with that as a thing. I'm going to put some legs on it now. So basically going to come down here. I'm going to put another couple of rectangles. Let's put one there. We'll go out to that big, and we're going to put a rectangle here of that big. And now that I've got that, I'm going to trim off some excess pieces. Let's trim them off twice, so we've got nothing else in there, so that those are all trimmed off. They're 10 by 10, but let's just add that now. So let's go dimension here on this one of 10, just to make sure, and a dimension here of this one of 10. So those are set, and then we're going to do the same here, dimension of 10 and a dimension of 10. And that will be good. Let's also just add a nice fillet in there to see what that's going to look like in here. And the fillet is going to be, let's just make it a nice 5 there. We'll do the same thing on the other side. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut for fillet when you're in text mode. And then go 5 on that side as well. So that we've got our piece there. And our box is going to basically be, well, that's going to be the side of the box. That'll be the feet or legs. I'm going to hit stop sketch now. I'm pretty happy with that size. I'm now going to extrude it, and remember our material is 3 millimeters, so we're going to extrude it 3 millimeters. So that's our material there, and I'm using black plastic, so I'm going to change it straight away. Appearance, glossy black plastic, drag that on there. You can see that it's now blacker. I'll close that appearance panel on, so that now I can see what I'm doing. For the benefits of this though, I actually might change the appearance to something lighter. So I'm going to choose a grey matte for the time being, so that I can better see it on the video. So I'm going to hit close. So that's my material there. I'm going to need 2 of these side panels. And you notice I haven't used components. I find using components a little bit funny when I'm designing like this. But instead I'm going to rename my body. And my body is going to have the name of side panel. So I've got the side panel there. I've got caps lock on, so I'll turn that off. And I'm going to need 2 side panels. So I'm instantly going to press the move key. And I'm going to move bodies. And I'll hover over this one here until it locks on the middle. And I'm going to create a copy. I'm going to move this one to be -60. I'll just leave it like that, -60 across, OK. So now I've got two panels. I'm now going to draw in my side panels, or my front panel, this one on this front and back. So basically the thing that's going to basically hold the pens inside here between there and there. So let's create that on the side panel. I'm going to do that by creating a rectangle sketch, and I'm going to create it on this one here. So this new panel here, the side panel 1, I'm going to turn the other one off for the time being, so that I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to create a sketch on this that's just going to be a rectangle. I'm just going to draw the rectangle roughly in place, roughly where I want it, but not totally where I want it. Now with this type of design, particularly when you're working with 3mm, you can't join them right on the edge. If you're working with a thicker measurement, you could probably join them on the edge and use a smaller diameter screw, but I don't have a smaller diameter screw that's going to match this, and if I go too close to the edge, it's going to be a weakened joint. So basically I'm going to bring it in. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the diameter in here, from in here to be 2mm. So it's going to be in 2mm from the end. The thickness of this panel is going to be 3mm, which is the thickness of our material that we're using. I'm going to basically bring it so that the distance from the base here to this point here is going to be up a nice even 3mm as well. So there's going to be a 3mm gap at the bottom there. So it's not going to go all the way to the bottom. So you can see that I've got that in place. The final thing I'm going to do is, am I going to bring that line all the way to the top? Yeah, I might just do that. I might bring it all the way to the top. So to make that all the way to the top, what I can do is use the collinear button and make those in line. So now I've got that object there. So now if I hit stop sketch, it'll take me back to this view here. So this is the home view. You can see that it's turned me right around. And on the home view, the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the other panel on. So you can see that it's swinging around really quick. There it is there. That is what I'm going to extrude out into this one. So let's just press the modify and extrude that rectangle there, that panel there. And we're going to do it slightly differently to normal. We're not going to drag it out. We're going to use a two-sided direction for starters. And our extent of our first side, which is our first side is the side coming out this side, is not going to be a distance. It's going to be a to object, and we're going to bring it to the face of this one, and you'll instantly see that it's now cutting. We're going to make sure that we use new body, nothing but new body. The second distance we need to go out is also going to be to object, and it's going to be to the face on this side. And we're creating a new body, so we should have a panel that goes all the way through that panel and a panel that goes all the way through this panel. And now we're going to click on OK. So we now have another panel. We're now going to bring in or duplicate this top panel. So let's go to the top here in feature, and we notice that we're in perspective. I'm going to change that to orthographic so that I'm totally in top mode, so I can easily see this. I'm going to press M for move. I'm going to move the bodies, and I'm going to basically make it so that it's moving this way. I'm going to create a copy. I'm going to move it across to here. Now notice it's only moving in 5mm increments. If I zoom up, I should be able to go back 1, back 2mm, and there I've got that extra body there. So I'm going to press OK. I'm now going to name this the front panel, and I'm going to rename this one the back panel. It doesn't really matter. I could just call them both front panels. And now I'm going to go back to my view here. You can see now that I've got those panels in place. I now need to put a floor into my design here, and the floor that I'm going to use is only going to integrate with this this panel here. So it's not going to go through the front and back panel. It's just going to go through the side panel. So basically I don't want the front panel, or actually I do want the front panel. I don't want that panel there. So I'm going to do a rectangle on this face here, and that rectangle is just going to sit perfectly from here up to here somewhere, And that distance, I should have basically typed the distance in. That distance is going to be 3 millimeters. And I'm going to hit stop sketch. I'm now going to press modify, and I'm going to click on this one. And once again, I'm going to turn this front panel on. I'm going to choose a two-sided extrusion. I'm going to extrude to object and go to the front of this object. I'm going to change that straight away to new body. I'm going to go to the other side and choose object. I could just type in 3 millimeters, but I'm going to type in to object. And the object I'm going to use is this face here. So now that goes all the way through. I'm going to click on OK. And I'm pretty happy with that. If I wanted to put any holes in it, now would be the time to do it. So if I want to have any holes in here or in the side panels, that's the time to do it. Right now though, I'm not interested in putting any holes in. Maybe I want to put some chamfers in, I don't know, but let's just go to the home button and see. I'm pretty happy with that. So it's now time to move to the next phase. Now that we have our overlapping panel model, we can create the material joints. These are the joints that will be made out of the same material and laser cut into that material as the panels. We're now going to basically set up some finger type joints. So some finger joints in these panels here. And the panel that I'm going to use is going to be the front panel. So the panels that are actually injecting in. So these ones here, I'm going to get rid of the side panels from view at the moment. And I'm going to get rid of the bottom panel. This is the base. I should rename that the base, and just get rid of that from view as well. I'm going to create a sketch with the rectangle tool, and I'm going to start up in this top corner here. I like to make mine nice and easy to remember. So basically, I'm going to draw out my first corner here, and the distance out is going to be 3, and tab, the distance down, we're going to make it a nice easy round 10. So we have that 10, nice easy round 10 there. So now that I've got that nice easy round 10, I'm going to create a sketch rectangular pattern. Now this can be tricky to remember, but I'm going to double click so that I've got 4, count them 4 selected, and I'm going to drag this guy across here until it matches on this side. You can see it, mine matches on this side. If you've got unusual measurements here, it's going to be an unusual measurement here. So you're going to have to keep on playing with this number until you get it perfectly matched on the other side. I don't need 3 and I don't want 4. I only want 2, so I only want 1 on one side. Let's just drag this guy down here. So it's on the bottom. So let's zoom up there and move it on to the bottom. You can see 105 is not quite doing it. Let's play around with 106. No, 107. That's got it. I'm going to increase the number of these. So I'm going to go up until I'm happy with the number. And basically, I want there to be a nice number of tabs in there. So I'm going to hit stop sketch now that I've done that. So I'm happy with that number. I'm going to hit stop sketch. So we can see now that we've got this object here. I'm going to go modify, and I'm going to select the whole lot. So I'm going to select the whole lot, hit cancel. Let's select the whole lot. Okay, I've got the whole lot selected. Now I'm going to hit modify, press pull, and I'm going to deselect what's going on there. Try that again, modify. I'm going to modify everything, so I really should select everything, but let's just select these things. I didn't seem to want to work for me. All the way through. And then what I really need to do is just go extent to object. And I'm going to choose this object around here, and I'm going to leave it at cut so that it cuts that out. So now we've got 2 finger jointed pieces. So if I go back and turn my side panels on, you can see that those pieces look like they're jointed through, and that's what we're going to look for, except those side panels don't really have holes in them yet, so we're going to do that in a second. But the first thing, the next thing we're going to do is turn that base back on. That base has gone right through, so let's turn everything else off except for the base. And do the same sort of thing with the base. So let's just a bit repetitive with this, but let's go rectangle on here, and I'm going to draw a rectangle. Like I said, I like to use 10 millimeters and 3 millimeters, which is the thickness of my material there. And then I'm going to basically use the rectangle tool again. So double click on that. Make sure I've got all 4 selected, because if you don't, then you don't copy the whole sketch across. Take that down to 2, and then I'm going to bring this down here, and 3 is actually perfect, so I'm just going to go OK, and then I'm going to press stop sketch. I'm going to press Q to extrude these through, and if I change to the home button and extrude those back up through that object, that's just going to cut nicely. And now if I turn everything back on, you can see what I've got here. I've got these coming through, and now I finally need to do the cutting of the holes, because at the moment, if I just get rid of these other panels, the front panels don't have any holes, and we do need those holes in there, otherwise it just won't work. So basically how we do this is we use the modify combine button. So modify combine, mine's up here, and I'm going to go for the target body, and I'm going to select the first side panel. My tool bodies are this one, and the bottom one. Everything that's cutting into that one tool, I'm going to use. And my operation is going to be cut, but it's important that I want to keep the tools, otherwise they'll disappear. So I'm going to press OK now. So what that's done is that's now, if I turn the front and the back, and you can see now that I've got holes in that particular one there, and that's going to be laser cut into that, so we can actually join those together. We need to do the same thing for the other side, so I'm going to turn these guys back on and press, might be easier if I turn the front side panel off, so that side panel off, and I'm going to press modify. My target body is this one, my tool body is this one, and this one. See, I've only got one selected because I deselected that one, so I need to actually make it so that I'm not actually, there you go, I'm going to select all of them now. Once again, make sure that keep tools is selected and press OK. So now I should be able to, if I turn these guys off, I should be able to see just that target panel there, and that's quite nice. So we've got that capability working. So I've got this tall box working. So that is all of the panels done. Now if you were going to rely on glue to join yours together, you could use that and just leave it at that. I've found that working with glue and acrylic is particularly hard to do, but if you are just going to rely on glue, that would be a nicely jointed part, and it would just work. The final part that we need to do is to be able to create our screw provisioning. The screw provisioning dimensions will vary depending on the screws that you are using, and you will have to rely on your measurements that you have made or the specifications of those screws that you have pulled up from the internet. So the idea with these screws is that they're going to screw in through this panel here and into this panel here, and there's going to be a bolt or a nut, sorry, not a bolt, a nut on this side that is going to pull these two panels together. It's a fairly straightforward idea. So we're going to need a hole drilled through this end, and I often forget to do my holes. And then we're going to need a funny sort of cross-shaped basic pattern cut into this section here so that it lines up perfectly with the hole on this side. So I always do the holes last so that I know that they're going to line up. And this part can be a little bit tedious, but we're going to get through it anyway. So the first part that I'm going to do, I'm going to draw it on this panel only. So I'm going to turn off all the other panels, and you can right click and go isolate. And isolate will get rid of all the other panels. So that panel is going to be there. I'm going to go to the front view. So the screw is going to start here, right on this edge here, and pass through into this section. So let's just zoom right up onto this section and just draw it here. And we're going to draw it with the rectangle tool. And the rectangle tool is going to basically, we'll start on this face, and we're going to draw a rectangle, right? So basically I'm just going to draw any old rectangle, and we're going to dimension it in a second, but we're also going to have a rectangle here as well to be where the nut's going to be, and once again we're going to dimension it now. So the first dimension I'm going to play with is this one here, and this dimension is 3mm for me because I'm using an M3 screw, and my M3 screw, I measure, if I haven't, I've already measured it. The diameter of the threaded part of the screw is 3mm or 2.9 something millimeters, and now I'm going to make sure it's in the middle. Now this distance here to here, can we measure it? Well, we can measure it and then we can see that it's 10. We can't actually put a measurement on it, but we can actually sit there and say it's going to be 10. So we're going to press OK, and that's a measurement. That's 10mm difference. So I'm going to basically say that this is 3mm here. To put it in the middle, I'm going to take 3 off 10, which will give me 7, and divide that by 2, which will give me 3.5, and move this to be 3.5mm, which will put it, I'll type that in, 3.5mm, which will put it exactly in the center. That's really helpful. Now my screw is from the cap, from underneath the cap to the end of the screw, is 15mm. That's the actual specifications. I like to add an extra millimeter, so let's make that 16 so that I've got a bit of room to move. And if I go with the 16mm on that screw, then I realize that I've got 3 taken up by the first bit of material. That leaves me 13mm for this distance here to here. So let's put in a dimension of this distance from here to here of 13mm. Okay, and you can see that that's all of a sudden created this box out of the loop. So let's actually not change that yet, and instead put a dimension from here to here. Dimension, I said, from here to here, and let's just make that dimension 2mm. Okay, so we've got a 2mm dimension here, and now I can double click on this and change this to what did I say, 13, and that's going to move that to there. This dimension here, let's zoom up, of this object here, for my particular nut, so the thickness of my nut, I reckon about 2.7 will actually get it right. And the distance from here across this part is actually 6. So that's going to be measuring that. And this distance from here to here is going to be, well, it's going to be 6 minus 3, because we've got the measurement of the middle diameter, divided by 2, which is going to be 1.5. That's going to go through there. So that's basically created that hole. I'm now going to go T to trim and get rid of that, and that, and that, and that. So we can now see that we've got that happening. Now, if I want to copy this down in lots of ways, so if I wanted to have heaps of these, you generally don't need a lot of screws. For this, something this small, I'm going to use 2. So I'm going to use the pattern tool again to get this. So I'm going to go Sketch, and I'm going to go to the rectangular pattern tool, and I'm going to start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines. So I should have 11 things selected, and I'm going to move it down here until I'm happy with where it's going to go. And it's going to go on that one there, and you're going to find that this is a bizarre number to play with, maybe. So if I go 71 maybe, or 71.5, that looks about right. So I've got 3. I said I only want 2. I don't want 3. 3 is going to be overkill, so I'm going to go down to 2, and I can't move it out this side because they're going to be the wrong way around, but there's an easy way around that. So I'm going to press on OK to have that rectangular pattern there happening. I'm now going to do a mirror on the sketch, and I'm going to select all of the objects. So select all of the objects, so use the select tool and select all of the objects except for that one. No, right, sorry, my bad. I'm going to use the mirror tool, And I'm going to select by making sure I grab all of these guys around here, and there's something I know I've forgotten to do, and that's what it is. Stop, my bad. I'm going to hit cancel. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to press P to project, and I'm going to project this line here and this line here under my sketch. That means I can now use those lines on my sketch. I'm going to press L to draw a line tool, and I'm going to make it a construction line, and it's going to start from the midpoint, and the midpoint's that triangle there, and go down to the midpoint here, and there's a triangle appearing there too. Let's turn that construction line off now. Now I've got something to mirror around. So I'm going to basically go back and choose mirror now, and making sure that I've selected everything on this one. So all of these guys, all of these lines here. It's really hard to know that I've selected them all. And let's go SCO and make sure we also select all of these lines here. And you've got lots of things selected, so I've got all those things selected. And now I'm going to select the mirror line. The bell's gone. And they should appear over that side. So if I hit stop sketch now, I should be able to press Q. So I need to select this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. This is rather complicated. I've done this now, and now I'm going to turn on the other panel on the other side, and I'm going to extrude those just right through, all the way through, and press OK. So that's got that done. I now need to remember to do the holes, because there are no holes for screws there. So pretty tricky, but basically what you're going to do is work your way around all of these things and draw a circle. Circle's going to go in here, and you can see that it's pretty tricky, but circle is going to go in here, and it's going to be a 3mm circle for my M3 screw. And if I press P to project and just project that point there, I can then use the diameter, the dimensioning tool to make it so that it's 1.5 that way and 1.5 that way. Okay, and then I'm going to work my way around and do all of them. I'm going to basically press pause at this point because I don't want to sit there and have you watch me do all of them. So I projected a mirror across there to get those last ones done. Now I'm going to basically turn on the other front side panel. I'm going to press Q to extrude this guy and this guy, and I can't see that one, so I'm going to turn the front panel off. This guy and this guy, but before I extrude, I'm going to turn that panel back on again. And it's probably a good idea just to go to object and click on this one. That's going to cut right through now, and press OK. So now there we have it. We've got those holes through there, and I realized that I just did that wrong. Control Z. I didn't go all the way through all of them. So let's just go, it's a two-sided extrude. So let's go modify this one, this one, this one, and this one. Let's just choose two-sided this time, and to object this one, and this one is to object this one. That will work. So now I've got all of the holes in all of the sides, and I'm pretty happy with that. So now I can turn everything else back on. It's now ready for me to set up for the cutting of the panel. Notice I don't have to put any in this one because they're all held together by these four. Anything in here would be redundant, and that's being held in place just by those two pins that stick in, or those two fingers that stick in on those finger joints. That will hold that in place. Now that you've got a good idea of how to use this design, you should be able to use it to create a range of items and objects. This type of design has a number of pros and cons for use when you're creating with Fusion 360 to laser cut. The pros are that the general, simple, easy design and assembly, so you can design very easily and quickly and create objects that are easy to assemble. There's also the ability to disassemble the items that you can create. The joints are fairly strong, so the screw joints work quite well and are very strong and hold the pieces in place with little or no movement. Some of the cons are the appearance of these particular joints is not very nice because the screws are visible, and sometimes that isn't very attractive to what you're trying to achieve. You also can only really make these joints at right angles. You can make other joints at angles to different joints to make a 45-degree panel, but you can't join those two panels together and expect that the 45 angled panel will be nice and neat. The other thing that you have to consider are the hardware impacts. If you're trying to create an open box which fits a perfect square object, you can't use this technique because the screws impact, or the nuts in particular, impact into the space that you have created. You also need to realize that the heads of the screws also impact on your design. If you need to put the design flat on a table, for example, and you've got screws sticking out, those screws will impact on how it touches the table. It might make it so that they're lopsided, or it might mean that you have to model feet into your design.